Hello and welcome. It's Francis here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you would like to help support my channel by subscribing, and also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Ghana country, and as such I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of this land. So this video is inspired by one that Chanek put on his channel a week ago, maybe it's a fortnight ago, in relation to the seasonal wheel of the year, especially as how it is perceived or originated within contemporary industry, witchcraft. Now, in his video, Jack mentioned that there appeared to be a trend in certain online circles and platforms where the wheel of the year is being perceived as not being all that in touch with what's happening on the planet these days, and also something that once you do it once, you can tick it off your to-do list and move on to the next thing. Might just backtrack for those who may not have heard of this concept, this terminology, the wheel of the year. What's meant by that, especially within esoteric, earth-centric spiritualities, paganism, witchcraft, etc. And it's also now being adapted wider, is we're looking at the seasonal, not only the seasonal cycles, but the festivals, the observations, the special dates which fall within we're looking at a calendar year. So we're moving, say, from midwinter to spring, summer, autumn, and back to winter again. And even outside paganism and witchcraft, there is the sort of connection between the earth and the sun, and this is what gives us the solstices. This is the high point or the low point in relation to the angle of the earth, because it's on a 23.5-degree angle and wobbles around the sun. So the solstices is the high point or the low point, the further extremities, while the equinoxes is equal. And it's a little bit debatable as to how equal they actually are, but that's besides the point. And then there's also 4 observances that mark the beginning of the 4 seasons that we sort of are aligned with, we know of in the West. I see them as portals or gateways, and we're probably more familiar, especially this day and age, by their Celtic names. So we have Imbolc at the beginning of spring, we have Beltane or Betana at the beginning of summer, we have Lammas or Lurasa at the beginning of autumn, and we have Samhain or even Halloween at the beginning of winter. So when we consider this wheel in its entirety, the 8 seasons, the 8 sort of festivals, and I tend to, I know the word festival, it is an accurate description, but I don't know, they're not, sometimes you say our celebrations, some people see them as holidays, well, they're not really holidays by the modern context. I call them observances because these are times where, especially within my tradition, as to how I approach my tradition, these are times when I sort of stop and observe what's happening around me in nature, observe what's happening within me as well. So when we consider these 8 festival celebrations, observances that make up the wheel of the year, we also need to consider how they originated. Because what we know today, these 8 festivals, we also call them Sabbats, they're basically being put together in the 50s or 60s by Gerald Gardner, the founder of the revival of modern witchcraft. People call him the inventor. I disagree. And also Ross Nichols, who is the founder, was the founder of one of a very popular Druidic orders today, that being the Order of the Bards, Ovates, and Druids. And Gardner was also, and I'm quite sure Nichols was also, drawing upon their experiences in the other groups that they belonged to. For Gardner, this was the New Forest Coven that he was initiated into, I think, in the late 30s, 38, 39, just before the start of World War II. And the New Forest Coven itself, its members were also inspired by what's been called sort of a naturalistic movement that was happening in England at the time, which sort of started in the late 19th century, or 19th century, yeah, where there was sort of this romantic idealism looking back at nature and what it was like to be working on the land, probably from a more urban perspective, without having any idea what it actually meant to work on the land. And also could have been a reaction to their rise in the industrial world as well, sort of the severing between us, our connection with nature itself. So there's a lot of sort of underlying influences to what we call the Wheel of the Year. And since that time, since even when Nichols and Gardner got together, especially in the 80s and 90s, paganism in general, and that included witchcraft and druidry, spread across the Western world. And the result of this means that what was established back in England may or may not actually reflect where you are today. I am living in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere, and this is an ongoing problem that we have. Also, the lack of awareness, understanding, knowledge from a lot of the Northern Hemisphere writers, gurus, leaders. We've had to sort of, especially here in the Southern Hemisphere, do a lot of the work ourselves. Now, I've even written a book that came out 10, 12 years ago on the subject based at what I was doing back then. So I guess it's a little bit dated as well. So it also means, like, if you're in the tropics or tropical area, you may not see the 4 seasons. You may just get 2 seasons, like wet and dry. But I suppose Nichols and Gardner, although Gardner should have been a bit aware of this because he did live in Malaysia or Malaya for a period of time, but they weren't focusing on a global calendar. They were talking or focusing more on what they were doing at the time and bringing people together because, again, this is all pre the internet, and people did a lot in person. So you had to get meetings where people could get to. And with the 8 festivals, this meant that people could get together basically 8 times a year, every 6 weeks. And at that time, according to researchers, include especially Philip Heselton, he has done a lot of research into George Gardner and the New Forest Coven and the Brickwood Coven, and so on. People were enjoying this connection with nature, what they were doing. And it was more than just connecting with nature too. And I'll get to that in a minute. So Jack in his video talks about how people, so generally today, consider these Sabbats, these festivals that make up the Wheel of the Year, and how they're getting a reputation of being static, being for a single purpose. Where, say, example, Samhain is, as he gave the example, as being the Festival of the Dead, where we all revere our ancestors, and we do that only then. Or how Imbolc is the beginning of spring, so we all connect in with the Celtic goddess Bri or Bridget, and in doing that, we have to make a Bridget's cross or a cross per day, regardless of whether you work with Celtic or Irish deities, whether you have Irish or Celtic ancestral connections. This is what's being projected out there in books and in social media as well. We need to, there's this sort of, I'm just trying to find the word, there's this emphasis that regardless of what our practice, because we all have practices these days, we just don't do stuff in practice. We have to connect in with these somewhat foreign. Like I said, if we're not Celtic, if we're not Irish in particular, festivals, whether we like it or not. And I'm not saying that other cultures didn't celebrate the beginning of the seasons. It's just the terminology and the symbolism that we associate with, say, the beginning of spring and Mok with these days. There's got a whole kit and caboodle, and there doesn't seem to be much room for alteration or just changing them. So I guess the truth be told, within contemporary witchcraft, or at least how I was taught, what I teach, indeed, I hope was written in my book, there is a different approach to the Wheel of the Year. By that, I mean that there isn't this sort of bog standard box of what's coming up to Samhain, so what do? We do this. Or it's coming up to midsummer, what do? We do this. Within the contemporary witchcraft context, aligning yourself with the Wheel of the Year sort of takes on a whole different meaning. And by that, I mean it's not circular, or it's not just circular. It's more of a spiral. So not only do we move, and I usually start from, say, winter solstice, because that's the birth of the sun. And the Sabbats themselves, the Wheel of the Year, is actually the dance of the sun, of the god, within my tradition. So this is why I tend to start at the winter solstice. You can start wherever you want to, really. But, okay, we start from winter, we move into spring, we move into summer, we move to autumn, we come back into winter. But we sort of pass through these gateways, and we're sort of learning and evolving and spiraling. We're connecting in with the energies. We sort of spiral up with the sun to its peak at the summer solstice. Then we spiral down as the sun begins to move further away from the earth, or should I say the earth moves further away from the sun. And we're coming into winter solstice, the time of the longest and darkest night. And all of this can be seen in our environment around us, even where I live, where we tend to have microclimates and almost like two springs. It doesn't quite fit very neatly into this English or European Wheel of the Year. And this is another underlying aspect, is that I don't feel the need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, totally get rid of everything that Gardner wrote that's been passed down to me through my lineage. I use that in a different way, but then I also incorporate what's happening around me at the time. So when we look at the history itself, where it came from, how these 8 festivals got put together, as I said, largely Gardner's writings came from the New Forest Coven. What he observed there, the New Forest Coven were also heavily influenced by Margaret Murray, who in her books, she talked about this witch cult, and she mentioned that there were the 4 Sabbats, or festivals that they observed. And these 4 festivals, and this is quite interesting, actually marked the entry of each month, or each season, I should say. So we had May Eve on the beginning of May, so that happened on the 30th of April. We had February Eve, again, happened at the beginning of February, so that was the 31st of January as it led into the season. August Eve happened on the 31st of July. And then, of course, November Eve which happened on the 31st of October, leading in. Now, whether they were aware that the Celts actually celebrated their festivals from dusk to dawn, giving that eve aspect or not, I don't know. But that was something that I was taught when I was doing Celtic studies, and this is why the Celtic festivals happened on the eve before the start of the day, where Samhain happened before Christian Convenient, and because my mind's just gone blank. All Hallows Eve. So it's All Hallows Eve as to All Saints Day. All Saints Day happened on the day. All Hallows Eve or Samhain was the night before the Celtic influence. And another thing that Jack points out is that the Celtic or Irish names, as he refers to them, we know these festivals by, and I'm just going to pause because I'm just going to grab my book. So just a moment. Okay, I've got my books here. So the Celtic names that we are more familiar with basically came into sort of popular conscious awareness largely through the popularity of this book, 8 Sabbats for Witches by Janet and Stuart Farrar. And this book was published in the 80s. I think my edition is 81. And it's interesting because they used the Celtic names or the Irish names because they were living in Ireland at the time. And it doesn't mean to say that they were the only people who used those names, but due to the popularity of this book and also Witches Bible Complete, which combines 8 Sabbats for Witches, this is what sort of has spread since the 80s all across pagandom, witchdom, etc. So today it's very common, it's very more common, especially in the wider community, to use those Celtic Irish names. What's interesting is that in Farrar's earlier book, What Witches Do, and this edition is 73, in the section under seasonal festivals, he mentioned in this time he was described as half English, half Scottish, and born in Essex. So I don't think he joined the coven. I don't think they as in him and Janet, had moved to England at that stage. It's quite interesting because I don't know if you can see the dedication is made to Alex, Maxine, and Naya. But in chapter 7, which is about the seasonal festivals, and this is Stuart's own book, he says there are 4 great festivals that are February the 2nd, Candlemas, 30th of April, May Eve, 31st of July, August Eve, and the 31st of October, Halloween. He says they are linked to the agricultural and herd raising year rather than the astronomical one, but witches celebrate the latter as well as the 2 solstices, June and December, and also the 2 equinoxes, which is March and September. And in this book, he doesn't actually use their Celtic names or the Irish names that he does in 8 Sabbats for Witches when, as I said, he and Janet had moved to Ireland. And also, actually, with 8 Sabbats for Witches and the Witches Bible, which a lot of people sort of use this as a standard text, when you're looking at the Sabbaths, in particular, so Lammas or Lunasa, it can be very confusing and totally irrelevant because it is very much contained with Irish sort of folk costumes, heritage that if you're not aware of or you don't use are completely out of place. So these alternate names, these Irish Celtic names today, I said, are very popular. And then added to that, we have a gentleman by the name of Aidan Kelly, and I should have got his book, but I won't worry about that. And he wanted to have Celtic or Irish sounding names for all of the festivals. Already, the winter solstice could be known as Yule, which is from the Nordic tradition. So he, I wouldn't say invented, but one of them he did. He was the one largely responsible for calling the spring equinox as Ostara or Ostra, named after an Anglo-Saxon deity, allegedly, or a period of time. Also, Leith or Litha for midsummer, which again is controversial, and the most controversial of all that, if any name gets under my skin, it is calling the autumn equinox Mabon, because Mabon is a deity within the Welsh tradition. It's found in the Mabinogion or the Mabinogi, and he has nothing to do with the autumn equinox. If anything, he is the son of the Great Mother. So he is the sun. So he, in the story, you can find different versions on the internet and also in different books, and they talk about it more in depth. He is being rescued to be reborn. So if anything, he has more of a connection with the winter solstice, it's coming up, being reborn, than the autumn equinox. So that's another kettle of fish. Anyway, I'm getting off the topic. So coming back to the Wheel of the Year, so as it emerged, we have these two distinct Sabbats. We have what's known as the Greater Sabbats. These are the original Eves that was derived from Margaret Murray's books. This is the witch cult in Western Europe. She also has another one, the God of Witches. At least within the wider pagan community. And then we have the addition of what's known as the Lesser Sabbats, which are the spring equinoxes and the solstices, and it has nothing to do with importance. When one's greater, one's lesser, it has nothing. You want to see the greater festival sort of mark the gateway to the season, while the lesser is the midpoint of each season. So what I guess all of this means is that when we keep in mind, and this is something that Jack reiterates in his video, that this Wheel of the Year emerged through the context of contemporary or initiatory witchcraft, even Druidry, really, as well as we want to include in Ross Nichols, and it definitely can be found in Druidry, even though they've changed the Sabbats now to more Druid names. And as such, it was specifically designed for those who've undergone initiation into that particular tradition, who had been taught how to honor particular gods, have been taught specific law and teachings, rites and rituals, a particular slant on mythos. And as such, as we move through the year, each time we move through this wheel, because it's experiential, we experience different things. And this means that you have to actually do it. You have to do the rituals to actually know what they are talking about or get the deeper understanding. And this is something very difficult to write about. That's why in my book, I really haven't put down a ritual in relation to the Sabbats, to the Wheel of the Year. I've talked about what we have done or what we did in the Coven at the time. And some people have added some of their experiences, but it's something that you have to do yourself, and each person will have different experiences depending on where they are knowledge-based, how open they are to the environment around them, to sensations, to energies, how familiar they are with specific myths, what they're doing, etc., etc., etc. And yes, so when we get the books, and I hope my book's not like that they give rituals, even say in the Farah's book, when you read it, it can sound or seem very disjointed, very actually out of place, but you need to then work with it. And sometimes what's written down doesn't actually translate from experience into the written word. And this is where the issue that we have, especially when everybody wants to academicize, is that word, a craft, or anything that's psychic or spiritual. Especially in English language, it's very limiting. Some of these things you cannot express, you cannot put into words. And so we can't relate it. You have to experience it for yourself. And also, if you haven't sort of been brought into the fold, undertaken an initiation into a particular tradition, there's also going to be a level of understanding that you're never going to get, especially if that tradition is oath, which initiatory or contemporary witchcraft is. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that you cannot experience the will of the year for yourself. You certainly can. However, in order to gain a deeper understanding of it, even from a general pagan perspective or even non-religious perspective, because I am talking about contemporary witchcraft as a religion, we need to also get rid of the concept that's developed over the years that each festival is separate to the next one. Because we're talking about a wheel, we're talking about a circle, we're talking about, as I said, a spiral. Everything is interconnected. And you just need to look at nature. Nature doesn't just stop as it goes through the seasons. It flows into the next. There is no starting or stopping. It is a build-up or a descent. So this also means that the energy ebbs and flows. As I said, it builds up from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, and then it descends down to the winter solstice again. And I find it amusing because people who often criticize the wheel actually work with the moon, work with the lunar cycle, so they have a basic understanding of energy ebbing and flowing. The Sabbats, the seasons, this wheel of the year is basically the same thing, except for it's on a larger, deeper, more profound level. And as I said, it's not a circle, it's a spiral, because each time, say you do a winter solstice rite, the rebirth of the sun, why you're doing a rebirth of the sun is because the sun has descended from midsummer through, or the autumn festivals through Halloween, Samhain, into the underworld, and now it's coming up again. So you are bringing in energies or symbolism from Samhain. And then from midwinter, as the sun emerges, life becomes attracted to the surface of the earth again. And Imbolc, it's all about the celebration of life returning. So you're also bringing in the energies of Imbolc. And because everything moves and flows each time you go around on this wheel, you're gaining more knowledge, more experiences. So you're gaining a deeper understanding, almost being taken to another dimension or level based on the experiences that you have undertaken each year. As I said, each Sabbath, each point on the wheel of the year, each festival, celebration, observances, we stop, we observe externally, internally, as above, so below, as within, so without. what is happening, reflecting on us, keeping in mind that nature is this guiding force, propelling us onward. And this is really important to keep in mind, especially when we do not live in England. And we need to check into our local environment. And I'm not going to talk about global warming or climate change or anything like that. I'm just talking about bog standard environments, different environments. I said here in Australia, we have so many microclimates. What I do here in Adelaide is not the same as someone in Perth or Darwin or over on the eastern coast in Sydney or Melbourne. Where I live in Adelaide is not the same that someone even south of me would do as well. Or even an hour's drive from me would do. There are similarities, but there's also a lot of differences as well. And this, I suppose, within the context of contemporary witchcraft, when we know the foundation of the Sabbath, what it means, then we can apply what resonates for us. The symbolism may not be identical. Like in winter, where I live, we do not get snow. So we don't include snow or talk about snow in our rites. But there is this emergence. There's also the time of the longest night. Even in the middle of suburbia where it's hard to get the darkness, we can still go within our own selves to experience that deepest dark. And then light the first candle as the returning light. So each marker point, not only are we checking in with what is happening around us at the moment, but also we are carrying through these observances from previous Sabbath, also the one that we did the year before. We're also planting the seeds of the one that's going to happen next year, and looking at what is happening in the mirror image on the other side of the wheel. And I'll just get the cover of my book out, where we've got, say, the autumn equinox and the spring equinox. We've got midsummer and we have midwinter. So everything we are looking at, we're looking at Beltane here. We have Samhain or Halloween here. The opposite is also being mirrored back at us. Again, halfway point, pausing, reflecting to see what happens. Jack also mentions in his video that the wheel of the year is an internal return. I really like that. It's constant. It is never ending. It's almost like the Ouroboros, the snake swallowing its tail. There's no beginning, there's no ending. It doesn't matter what time of the year you get on board, you start observing the Sabbats. It doesn't matter where you are. If you have a basic understanding or diagram of the 8 Sabbats, maybe just the 4. And it's up to you whether you want to acknowledge the greater Sabbats or the lesser Sabbats. As I said, the lesser Sabbats, the solstices and the equinoxes, were observed by peoples, maybe not all of them, but they either observed either the solstices or the equinoxes all around the world, on every continent where humans had resided. Not talking about Antarctica. There are still monuments and structures and ruins that were aligned with this relationship between the earth and the sun. So it's extremely, extremely ancient. And then when we discovered agriculture, this is where the greater Sabbats came. They mark the beginning. As I said, you may, if you live in around the equator, you may not have 4 distinct Sabbath or seasons. You might only have two. In a lot of indigenous cultures, and this is something else that I mentioned in my book, they have a seasonal wheel of some description. Here in Australia, this could be from 2 seasons all the way through to 8 or even 10. And some of these seasons may only last a week or so. The Kaurna people here on the Adelaide Plains, they had 4 seasons. But their seasons did not start when our European ones do. And I struggle when they say, oh, it's the 1st of December, it is officially summer. Well, sometimes Mother Nature has brought summer a little bit earlier, sometimes it's a little bit later. She will not be dictated to by a calendar. But these Sabbath give us a time to stop, look around us, observe what is happening around us, to check in. And even here in Australia, one that I do struggle with is Lammas or Lunasa, which occurs here at the beginning of February or the end of January. This traditionally is a harvest festival, the first harvest festival of the grain. Where I live, a lot of our grain farmers, especially in the Eyre Peninsula, have harvest around midsummer, which sort of ties in, because summer is a festival for bounty, but that is also sort of like a harvest festival for the grain. When it comes to the 1st of January, not every year, sometimes it starts earlier, but this is often the time when we are on highest alert for bushfires. And I said this could start earlier depending on our weather. So it's really the harvest aspect to it can be very difficult to incorporate. Then again, sometimes we need to massage things to fit in. How Australia, especially indigenous plants, the eucalypt, they need the intensity of the fire to bring forth regeneration. So there is sort of I'm just thinking that's probably more sort of Imbolc sort of concepts where we're bringing forth new life, but we can then turn into not having an external harvest around us to bring it within our own self. I do tend to, because unfortunately there's not a lot of information about the Kaurna people. They unfortunately were almost wiped out by European settlers at the time due to smallpox coming down the Murray River. They are regaining their culture, which is fantastic. So again, it's very experiential, but their guidance is to turn to the land. What is happening there? If anything, if we cannot have a physical harvest, have a time to reflect, contemplate. Yes, we're heading into, especially here in Australia and Adelaide, heading into a very busy, intense time. It's almost a time of preparation. We should have done our preparation, especially for the fire season. So we can move that into our Sabbath rite. Oh, yeah. I think I have talked much. I'm beginning to get a little bit off track. And yeah. So the wheel of the year, let's bring it back in. It's more than just something that you do once and tick off. It's living and breathing. It's evolving. It connects us back to our environment. It's what makes us connected to this planet. I think, especially in our modern world, which is very consumerism driven, tapping into, observing, following the wheel of the year is probably more and more important for us. And you, as I said, you don't even have to be religious to follow it, observing the seasons, changing of the seasons, seeing how the energies resonate or reflect within you. You know that nature is a great healer. This could be why we are so disconnected and isolated and lonely. It's because we have disconnected ourselves from her. I'm not exactly telling you to go out and hug a tree, but hey, if you want to, why not? Because you can get really good grounding from Mother Nature. And this is one of the underlying aspects too of the wheel of the year, especially for me, because being, I call myself a stranger in a strange land. I live in Australia. I've lived in Australia for a lot longer than I have in my own home country. I'm also, Indigenous to this land. It helps me to connect in. And as I said, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because even though, yes, I do have English ancestry, it also helps me to connect in with my own ancestral lineage as well, even though it doesn't fit. So I hope this has been of interest to you. One thing I will say, what I find interesting is because Australia is the same size as the US. Why? Pagans in particular, and I could be completely wrong, but this is from my understanding, from what I've witnessed over the years, this debate about the seasons, the Sabbats, how you honor them where you live in the US, why it hasn't been explored deeper in America. I mean, would someone in Los Angeles do rituals the same way as somebody in New York? One side to the other, or someone up at Boston do something similar to someone down in Miami? I don't know. I would find it very interesting. Or even someone from Nevada in the middle of the desert. Would you do something very similar to someone who lives in Maine? If you do, why? How does that fit? Or do you include more nature? Observe more what's happening around the world around you into your own Sabbats. I hope this is giving you a little bit of food for thought, if you haven't thought about it that way. Maybe look at what you do when you work through the wheel of the year, a bit of inspiration. Put some comments below if you feel obliged to share. I do go back and look at the comments. Help support my channel by subscribing if you feel inclined to. And thank you for watching. Blessings.